So as we saw yesterday, Bernie Sanders suspended his 2020 presidential campaign, and that left Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee. But a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, myself included, have a lot of reservations about Joe Biden, his conservative policies, his personal scandals, and of course, a real concern that he won't be able to close the deal and defeat Donald Trump, based on his policies, based on his cognitive decline / dementia, and based on a general belief that he does not have the ability to drive enthusiasm among the people that Democrats need to get to the polls in November. But there's one thing Joe Biden could do that could almost certainly guarantee his victory, and that is embracing Medicare for all. Joe Biden needs to do a lot if he wants to match the ambition of Bernie Sanders. And maybe we can't expect that from Joe Biden because Joe Biden isn't Bernie Sanders. But if Biden wants to win this election, he needs to embrace the one policy that can unite the Democratic Party and that can bring in millions of voters, including independents and infrequent voters, who now know more than ever that the current healthcare model is a failure and that Joe Biden's public option compromise won't nearly do the job. Joe Biden, as I noted, has a massive enthusiasm gap with Donald Trump. I made a video about this, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, exploring how the gap of enthusiasm between Trump and Biden is actually bigger than the gap between Clinton and Biden, and that voters were about 8 points more enthusiastic about voting for Clinton than they were for Biden. And Clinton lost in large part because of enthusiasm or lack thereof. And so Biden's in a real tricky spot there. And one of the things Biden can do to generate that is reach out to the Bernie base. And Medicare for All is that opportunity. Joe Biden just tweeted out like an hour ago, he said this on Twitter: a total of about 17 million people have filed for unemployment over the last 3 weeks. This is unprecedented. The economic devastation that families all across this country are experiencing is not their fault. We've got to take extraordinary steps to protect them. And that's a correct tweet. Whether or not you think Joe Biden is genuine, he's right there. This isn't the fault of working and middle class and poor Americans. It's the fault of a broken system. It's a fault of a crisis of global proportions. But Joe Biden's own plans won't do nearly enough. And we could talk about the macroeconomic effects, and we could talk about how Biden won't do enough to challenge corporations in broad terms, but specifically on Medicare, he is not doing enough. Biden has continued to insist, even as this crisis has rendered dozens of millions of people unemployed, that healthcare models primarily linked to employment status are the way to go, and that his public option would give people the quote-unquote choice to have a public-funded healthcare plan, but that most people would likely stick with their workplace plan because, as Biden has often said, people love their workplace insurance. But here's the thing. Even if that's true that people like their workplace insurance, which I don't think is the case when you have to pay deductibles to even get access to your healthcare insurance money, the reality is that many people, without any choice at all, are losing their health care. And when you throw in the fact that their spouses are losing care and that their children are losing care, that means that dozens and dozens and dozens of millions of Americans, maybe even more when this crisis truly peaks, won't have any health care whatsoever. And Joe Biden's continued insistence that, this would be fine because they could just shift to the public option choice isn't good enough. It's going to be inferior. And during moments like this, vast amounts of people making an instant switch from their employer plan to a public option could cause chaos. And at a time like this, if there's ever a future crisis like it, you don't want to have to worry about dozens of millions of Americans scrambling to get on the public plan and that causing administrative headaches. When there is a health crisis, you want every available resource dedicated to keeping people well and doing all the sorts of things that save lives and that improve lives. That's what your goal is during a crisis, especially. It's not about administrative wrangling. Medicare for All has been proven correct by history, but also by the very present we currently live in. And Joe Biden needs to realize that. A lot of people are not going to believe Joe Biden if he all of a sudden embraces Medicare for all. People will rightfully be skeptical of that. If Joe Biden came out tomorrow and said, I'm backing Medicare for all, guys, love it, gonna do it, I promise. A lot of people will say it's just an effort to get Bernie Sanders supporters to donate and volunteer and vote for Biden, and then once he wins, he'll bury that promise like Democrats have often buried progressive promises once they've won power. But the fact is, guys, most voters would likely believe him. And if you're talking purely pragmatically, if I'm giving advice to Joe Biden, I really do think that backing Medicare for all is a winner. Most Bernie Sanders voters, maybe not the hardcore online all the time Bernie supporters, but most regular Bernie voters will be inspired if Biden makes that choice. And we have to remember that recent polling has shown 55% of Americans, including a majority of independents, now support Medicare for all. And that support is rising during this crisis. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? People are realizing that, hey, having my healthcare be dependent on a job that I might not have next week or next month ain't the best plan. When I lose my job, I don't want to have to worry about losing my basic healthcare and being one, illness away from utter bankruptcy and homelessness and destitution. I don't want that. And so independents and Democrats now broadly support Medicare for all. Joe Biden needs to jump on that because most voters will believe him. That's the simple truth. Joe Biden could even do it so easily right now. He could make it easy and he can make it seem genuine. Joe Biden could say that I've spoken with Bernie Sanders. I've spoken with people from his movement. And I've witnessed what Americans by the tens of millions are going through right now and may experience in the coming weeks and months. And I now realize that the public option model I once supported, which would leave 10 million people minimum uninsured, even in the best of times, is not enough. And this crisis, again, speaking to Bernie and his people and to healthcare professionals and to regular Americans, I have now realized that Medicare for all is the best way forward. I have basically seen the light. And Biden, if he can deliver that message, and we know Biden has a difficulty delivering messages, would convert a large amount of Bernie people into supporters. He needs to do that. If he does that, he will cut out this fake Trump, partial musing support about maybe giving everyone temporary Medicaid. Because if Trump does that and Biden still thinks that public options are the way forward, Biden's going to lose. It doesn't matter that Trump's lying. It doesn't matter. People will believe Trump, or enough people will in Wisconsin, in Ohio, in Florida, in Michigan, and all of those swing states that he will lose. He needs to come out for Medicare for all right now, make that his key platform piece going forward, and he will convert independents and he will convert progressives into his movement. And as we recall, Bernie Sanders in primary elections, even when he was losing, was doing very well among independents and young people. And independents growing more favorable to Medicare for all means they're accessible to Biden when he backs it. And young people who are disproportionately likely to have the sort of jobs that give no healthcare benefits, even when they have their job, are excited about a Medicare for all future. If Biden wants young people and independents, I think Medicare for all is a winning policy, or at the very least, it's the sort of policy that will engage people that are on the periphery and that you need to get on board early and often in this process. So Joe Biden can win this election. It is possible. I'm not saying that it's a guaranteed victory for Trump, but I do think that unless Biden makes severe course changes toward things like Medicare for all, but also other policies, he will lose. The polls might look good for Joe Biden right now, but I don't think that's capturing the reality that's going to hit Biden. The people now seeing every day his cognitive decline and his dementia. The people hearing more and more about Tara Reade. That story isn't going away. It was being buried by the media until Bernie Sanders was out of the race. But now that he's out, I think the story is going to start getting more and more and more coverage. If Biden wants to make this happen, Medicare for All needs to be his centerpiece. Kyle Kulinski from Secular Talk had a really good series of tweets where he basically said that if Biden wants to convert the Bernie wing of the Democratic Party and the tens of millions of people who are open to voting for Democrats but won't vote unless they're given something to vote for, not merely vote against, they want Medicare for all. They want free education. They want a basic income. They want these sorts of policies. And so they should at least be considered. And Biden should pick one or two of them and make them his centerpiece. Medicare for all, I feel, is the best one, bar none, because it really does speak to the current crisis. Bernie Sanders supporters were every bit as dedicated to defeating Donald Trump as Biden supporters were, or as the supporters of any of the other candidates. We really just fundamentally believe that Joe Biden won't be able to do it unless he really changes his core approach to this election. We need to see that happen. If you want the Bernie base on board, Joe Biden, back Medicare for all. You won't win all Bernie supporters. A lot of people, because of Tara Reade alone, will never vote for you. But if you want to win millions of Bernie people to your cause, make a real attempt to reach out, and you will win this election most likely.